one of the things that I want to really focus on next, because Jay unpacks the four phases of attraction, dreams, struggle, and trust
Mm.
in the book, is I think my favorite rule, honestly, of all eight is number four. Your partner is your
I
guru.
thought it would be. When you said your favorite rule, I was thinking it would be this
Why did
one.
you think that it
I
would
don't
be?
know. I just feel like obviously, you and Chris have such an incredible hard work based, like genuine, real relationship in marriage. And it's like, I think as you spend more time together, you start learning so much more through your partner and from your partner. And I don't know, I just felt it. It was intuitive. I was just like, Mel, yeah, I can see Mel being Chris's guru, and I can see Chris being Mel's guru.
Will you explain what that means? Because I think when you
Yeah.
first hear your partner is your guru, I didn't realize what it meant because it
Yeah.
didn't mean what I thought it meant.
Yeah. And I want to encourage people to understand that this step comes as you deepen a relationship. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't something you want on day one. Like if anyone's listening to that rule and you don't read the book and you're thinking, oh, yeah, my partner's my business mentor or they're my coach or they're my therapist, like that's not what I'm talking about
Right.
at all. What I'm saying is that as you deepen your friendship, as you deepen your relationship, as you actually get to know each other better, your partner becomes the one person who exposes all your flaws, all your weaknesses, and all your truths to you without even trying. And I'll give a personal example of this. When I first met Radhi, I didn't have anything. I didn't have a job. I was in $25,000 worth of debt. I didn't have any job offers or prospects. And I was being rejected by 40 different companies during the time we were dating. And so I would tutor economics and subjects that I was great at college and university to students, save up to pay for our dates. And I always felt intimidated that we'd go on dates and I'd be with her friends or family and they'd be like, well, Jay, what are you doing? What are you up to? And I really had no answer because I'd just come out of being a monk. And surprise, surprise, no one wants to hire a former monk. And then it was really interesting because as my career took off, and I've been with Radhi obviously since before, and then as my career took off, I started to hit these external milestones.
Yep.
And I'd hold them up almost, not physically, but mentally. I would hold them up and I'd be like, Radhi, love me for this. Look what I just achieved. I did this. Love me for this. And she wouldn't love me more for that. And so then I achieved something bigger and I'd be like, well, look at this. Look what I did. Look what I did for us. Look how amazing I am. Like, love me for this. And she didn't react differently. And so then I kept going and then I held it up. And it was at that point I realized there's only two truths. Either my wife doesn't love me, which I know wasn't true because she'd shown
Right.
me love in so many ways,
Right.
or that there was something I was missing. And so what I realized was I was trying to get my wife to love me for what I achieved when she actually loved me for who I am.
Hmm.
She didn't teach me that by getting out a whiteboard and drawing bullet points. She taught me that by loving me only for my essence and who I was. So every time she would acknowledge me or appreciate me, it was not about the views or the downloads or the amount of people that were commenting. That was never the stuff she congratulated. The thing she congratulated was, I really love what I learned from you in that moment today.
Hmm.
Or I really loved how you dealt with that challenge. Or I saw that you were being criticized for this and I saw how you responded. That's what I love about you. So, just in the way she loved me, she was teaching me how to love myself. And I think that your partner is the only person who can do that for you because they know you so intimately. But the interesting thing is, a guru, in the way I learned from a guru in ashram, in the way I studied, gurus don't judge, they don't critique, they're compassionate and empathetic. They don't complain and compare to show you your flaws. They reflect the truth back to you just by being present with you so that you can see yourself. And so a guru isn't a partner who's telling you what to do or manipulating and controlling you because that's ownership. That's not a relationship. And I
Ooh,
think
ooh,
people,
hold on, everybody. There was another one. The monk is in the house, dropping the wisdom. I love making you laugh.
Oh gosh, you make
But
me laugh so much.
but
Yeah,
you just said that when somebody's controlling you and when somebody is, I would even add in nitpicking, criticizing,
yeah,
manipulating, judging, being cold with you,
yeah,
silent treatment, that's ownership.
yes,
Will you talk more about that? Because I
yeah,
think there's a lot of people listening to you right now going, your marriage sounds amazing,
yeah,
and my relationship sucks
yeah,
because I do not have a partner that is like that. I have a partner that's criticizing me. I have a partner that is doing all those things that make me feel bad.
yeah,
So, talk to that
yeah,
person and
yeah,
this notion of partnership versus ownership.
yeah, absolutely. And so we come into relationships based on the imprints that our parents gave us, as we talked about before, or even our first partners gave us.
Mm,
And we also have so much inside of us that's unresolved that comes out in four ways. And these four things are comparison, criticism, complaining, and control. We think that if we do these four things, we feel better about ourselves, our partner may change, and overall, this is the language we've learned in how to talk to anyone.
right.
And so, what we do is we compare them to someone else, thinking that if they know what one of our friends did for their anniversary, then our partner will get their act together.
Yeah,
No one in the history of comparison has ever changed their life because they were compared to someone else.
it's true.
You don't make someone act better by making them feel inferior. It doesn't work that way. People act better because they feel inspired to, they feel called to, they feel energized in their life, but we try and use comparison. If someone else is trying to control you, it can often come in the form of care. It can look like care, but it's actually control. And there's only one way to know. Is someone giving you care in the way you want to better you, or are they doing it to make you more comfortable and convenient for them? Are they telling you what to wear? Are they telling you which of your friends are a good influence on
Oh,
you? When you hear that, you think, oh, they might actually care about me. They might actually care about me because they're telling me these friends are a bad influence, these friends are a good influence. But wait a minute, I've never actually told them what I even do with these friends. I've never even told them. And by the way, I did some of this when I met Radhi. When I met Radhi, I would look at some of her friends and I'd think, well, I don't think they're a good influence on her. And even if it came from a place of care, I realized that wasn't my position. Some of these friends had been in her life far longer than
mm.
I'd been in her life.
Wow. That whole paradigm of ownership versus partnership.
Hmm.
Like, I hope that's a ding, 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 ding.
Yeah,
Is somebody controlling you and trying to change you and own what you're doing? Or are they truly in partnership, supporting you with your goals
yeah.
and hearing you?
And it applies the other way too, Mel. I think a lot of us who are in personal growth, who are in self development, we have a bad habit of wanting to improve our partners, but not in the way they want, in the way we want. The amount of people that come to me and say, Jay, I'm like really begging my partner to read your book. And I'm like, please don't. Like, please don't. I mean it because I want you to actually stay together. And maybe what they need to do is they need to watch one of my interviews with an athlete they love. Maybe
Mm,
that's what they need to do. Maybe
right.
they don't even need to learn from me. Maybe they need to learn from a completely different person in maybe it's one of our friends, maybe it's someone else, maybe it's someone from decades ago. The point is, are you trying to get them to the next step in their journey or are you trying to get them to the next step in your journey?
Oh, okay. Hold on, everybody. Did you just hear that? Because that is
Just
literally,
make me laugh.
that's it. No,
Yeah.
but so like
Yeah.
I really like to stop
Yeah, yeah, no, it's
because
beautiful. You do it so
I
well. You do
just
it so well.
want everybody listening to get the wisdom that you are weaving together because I think that's it right there. Are you trying to get them to step forward? You said it better.
Yeah.
Something
And
about like you're
I was saying, are you trying to get them to the next step in their journey? Or are you trying to get them to the next step in your journey? So you may love listening to me and Mel, and that's beautiful, and I love that. And if your partner loves listening to me and Mel too, awesome. but chances are they might like learning from a different voice and a different coach and a different teacher and a different guide. And guess what? That's okay, because what inspires them may be completely different. I've had clients before where I'm working with the wife or I'm working with the husband, and they want me to work with each other. And I'll say, if they want to, if that person wants to learn from me, I'm all for it. But we have to allow people to select their own mentors. We have to allow people to select their own path. And by the way, I'll give an example. There's a couple that I know, and one of them finds knowledge and learning to be what growth means to them,
Mhm.
and one of them finds service.
Mm.
So one of them will happily go to a soup kitchen, a homeless shelter, and help out every week. And to them, that's growth. And to the other person, reading books, listening to podcasts, trying to study and be better is their form of growth. Now, could we honestly say one is better than the other? No. It's just two different paths, and probably they'll cross at one point if we don't push the other person away. But sometimes we push away the other person so far that our paths of growth never get to come together.
Yes, and I think you also have to be present enough to know when someone that you quote love is pushing you off your path,
Mhm.
that you're busy supporting them on theirs,
Mm.
but they're not meeting you
Yeah.
halfway. We're talking about what I've learned in the last couple years about marriage. And my husband and I, as you now know, have been married for 26 years. We've been together for 28 years. We started seeing a marriage counselor, a therapist, whatever you call him. He's amazing. Dr. Cooper. I love this man. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, if you're listening. I want to share with you kind of 6 observations that I have from my personal experience about why it matters, why it's important to work on it, and what you need to do if you do want to repair a relationship that's broken or you want to improve and continue to grow together. So, the first thing is you have to be intentional and say to yourself, I am going to turn this around. I'm going to make it better. Because there's no half assing your marriage. You have to decide to make it better. Wishing it were better is what you're already doing. And it's very different than committing to make it better. Nothing in life is going to change until you make a decision to change it. And then you have to schedule in what you're doing with your partner to change it. And see, I look at marriage as this sort of like living thing. It's like a container in which you and your partner either grow or you wither and dry. I know that sounds like brutal and dramatic, but it's true. And if your marriage or your friendship matters to you, make it a fucking priority. It's really simple. If you want anything to grow, I mean, this is common sense. You got to care for it. You have to tend to it. You got to water it with kindness, with interest, with support. You have to tend to both your and your partner's ongoing growth. I mean, it's critical to your marriage. And I've said this a bazillion times, and I'm going to keep reminding you our marriage is not perfect. It's not the ideal. It is ideal for us. And I've already shared with you that there were years that are wonderful, where we were wonderful to each other, where we were together all the time and investing in each other's growth and growing together. And then there were those years that sucked. We caused each other a lot of pain. And I want you to view the painful stuff in a relationship like weeds in a garden. Over time, if you're not careful, those weeds, they fucking take over. So do not ignore the little shitty stuff because weeds, they start out as this tiny little thing. And then have you ever noticed you like go away from your garden for a couple days and it rains and then the sun comes out and these teeny little weeds are like 5 feet tall? That's the little shitty, irritating stuff. Talk about it. Ask for what you need. Clear the air. Do not harbor resentment. And I'm telling you, therapy, if you can afford it, get yourself to therapy. It is a gift. You know, Chris and I were already talking to an individual therapist, but that's not working on your marriage, by the way. That's working on yourself. And you should work on yourself. But it wasn't until we came together and made it a priority that things really started to shift. And one of the things that I love about talking to a therapist is that for me, I get more out of a 45-minute call with a therapist. We have never met our therapist in person. We do the entire thing virtually. But hitting the pause button every other week to truly unpack something that happened between the two of us, listen. to one another. That's the hard part for me, I'm learning, to learn about one another. This is better than any damn date night could ever be. Because we're not just like going out and having time alone, we're actually investing in our growth. That's very different than having a steak and a bottle of wine. Like we're digging out the weeds in our relationships so that things can blossom and bloom so that when we do go out for that meal and that night out, it's actually more than just a dinner date. It's something that has real depth to it. So for you, if you can't afford therapy, I totally get it, but I totally understand. I have been in that place in my life. There are free online courses you can take together. There are books that you could read together. In fact, the episode that we just released, Dr. Nicola Pera, her brand new workbook, How to Meet Yourself, is a guided journey through knowing yourself better. You could use that. $25. Use that to make your marriage better. So there are things that you can do if you get intentional. So, number two, this is also something that is critical. It seems like common sense, but you got to do it. You got to develop a genuine sense of interest again in the person. You were interested when you first met them. Remember that? But I bet along the way, you started to decide, oh, I know everything I know about this stupid person. Ugh, there they go again. Eye roll. Well, in therapy, I learned a lot about Chris that I didn't know. And I'm going to say it again. In therapy, I learned a lot about my husband that I didn't know. And I'm talking 24 years into marriage, things that I didn't know. I'm not talking about deep, dark secrets. I'm talking about the way that his thoughts and his feelings impact him. And like, for example, I had no idea how traumatized Chris was by his childhood because it wasn't like anything horrific happened to him. And his mom is one of my closest friends, but he was a latchkey kid. His parents were always working, his brothers were way older, nobody was ever around, and so it was this sort of slow death march of isolation and feeling constantly alone. His experience was when I get home, nobody's there. When I play baseball, nobody shows up. That if I ask for something, I get teased, nobody listens, so he stopped asking. In fact, he stopped asking to such a degree that he used to have a nickname in his family. When he was little, you know what they called my husband? The Monument. You want to know why? Because he didn't talk for 2 years. And everybody laughs about it. It was like some big joke. And the truth is, it's actually really sad. I mean, they laughed about it because nobody knew any better. And because he was just a little kid that felt like he was unseen and wasn't worthy of love, his needs didn't matter. He didn't know how to ask, or it just shut him down even more. And so I learned that part of the reason why he never asked for anything is because his experience growing up is that nobody gave a shit. And that helped me go from being annoyed at how quiet he is to really wanting to help support him. Because the fact is, he isn't the most effusive person. He's not the hardy har har guy. He's a deep thinker. And being interested, yes, it means be interested in somebody's hobbies. Be interested in what happened to them. Be interested in what they're saying. But it also means be interested in learning more about them as a human being. And we're all guilty of assuming we know someone just because we've known them for a long time. So, starting today, here's how you can apply this. Assume, starting today, that you don't know a lot about the person that you're with, that there's a whole part of them to discover. And I'm not talking about some deep, dark secret. I'm just talking about how they feel, how their childhood impacted them. Just think about yourself for a minute. When I think about how much I've changed, my God, in the last 4 years, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, I've lived that in my own mind and body. Unless you talk about it and listen to each other, you're not going to know that. I can give you another example of how little we know about each other. So, when I was hosting this daytime talk show, we did an episode where Chris was on, and there was this like marriage expert relationship person. And Chris revealed on national television that when it comes to being intimate, he prefers to have sex in the morning. I had been married to the guy for 22 years. I had no idea that's what he preferred. So, you're not going to really get connected to someone unless you're interested in learning more about them. So ask more questions, be more curious. And that interest also means be loud and celebratory. I've been working on this. I mean, Chris, as he's leading his men's retreat called Soul Degree, I'm cheering for him. As he is pursuing a master's in spiritual psychology, I am rooting for him. As he is studying and getting a certificate to be a death doula, I am like clearing the schedule, making sure he's got time to do that. As he is pursuing a certification to do integration therapy for the new psychedelic modalities, I'm like all in. Him feeling supported and celebrated, that makes him know that I'm not only interested, but that I love him enough to be supportive in the things that he wants to do. And of course, he is cheering loud for me. And this isn't just obvious, this is also researched. Celebrating and sharing wins is critical. It's probably one of the reasons why you're roommates. You need to start pointing out what's going right instead of griping about the shit that's going wrong. Researchers from UCLA discovered that the single most crucial factor in tightening or destroying a bond that you have with your partner is how you react to good news in one another's lives. How you react to good news, based on research, way more important than how you react to any bad news. And here's why. You see, researchers found that celebrating your partner gives your partner an emotional lift. Whereas playing down big news, like, "Oh, that's okay," it leaves a lasting chill. And so you can start implementing that practice immediately. The next time your partner has something good happen, big or small, celebrate that shit. Show them how proud you are. Give them a high five, hug them. And if they don't have something amazing going on, freaking call it out. Thank you for taking the dog out. Thank you for doing this. The small things really matter because when they're ignored, those small things become weeds and resentment that grow and that separate the two of you. Now, the third thing, we did an entire episode on this. I call it Get on the Fun Bus. I'm serious. In therapy, one thing that I said over and over to Chris is this: our life is too serious, man. I am so sick and tired of talking about all this serious shit. I am tired of the problems. I am tired of just feeling like life is a grind. We need to have more fucking fun. And the thing about fun, and we talked about this on the episode about having fun with your family around the holidays, is you're not having fun unless you plan to have fun. I think we all make the mistake of thinking that, oh, fun has to be spontaneous. No, when you were little, your parents planned all the fun shit you did, and so you got to get serious about inserting fun again. In fact, I want to share a story with you. This is how important this is and how this simple concept infuses a dead relationship with new energy. It infuses that roommate syndrome that you may be feeling with this new rhythm and fun that can happen. You know, instead of that slow quitting, you can pick up the fun again and start to reinvest in each other. And I'm telling you right now, the more that you can bring fun back into your relationship, just like you did when you were dating in the beginning. Remember those days? There's a reason why dating is fun because you're planning fun things to do. Just this past weekend, we had flown from Southern Vermont to Northern California to go to a business meeting. And we had 90 minutes before we had to get to the start of this business meeting. And as we're driving from the San Francisco airport, I'm like, oh my God, have you ever seen the Redwood Forest? I think Muir Woods is right here. Neither one of us had never been there. So we pull off the highway. It is 4:15 at night. The Muir Woods National Forest is closing in 45 minutes. There is a dark, looming rain cloud coming, and it looks like it's about to rain horizontally. We drive straight to Muir Woods with 30 minutes to spare. We were the only ones there. It was so fun. And there were this dark, cloudy sky, so it felt like we were in a Hobbit movie. We hadn't planned it. It was so fun. And it reminded me we need to do more of that. So, the fastest way to create more energy, go see a great movie. Go exercise or hike together. Take dancing lessons. Cook something new. Check out a concert. Head to a theme park. Ride a roller coaster. Go skinny dipping. It doesn't matter what you do. Do something that you used to do when you were dating. Just make it fun. And what if your partner doesn't want to do any of these fun things? Total bump on the log. All right. Well, when we come back, I have somebody who's struggling with that, and we're going to hear her question next. All right. Welcome back. I'm Mel Robbins, and we're talking about the things that I have learned after being married for 26 years and being in and working with a marriage therapist with my husband for the past 2 years. And so we've covered a couple of them. And now I want to address a question that I am getting a lot. And this one comes from a listener named Jen.
Hey Mel, it's Jen. How do we continue to move forward through the change process with a partner who's not willing to move forward too, or at least encourage you? There's a huge gap coming, and it's really scary. Thanks so much, Mel. We appreciate everything that you do.
I can kind of hear the fear in your voice, Jen. It is scary when you get to a point where you realize that you've grown apart from somebody that you used to know. But first, remember, if underneath all that you still truly love this person and you're willing to work on it, you can absolutely make it better. And it's worth doing the work on. But your question is something that I get a lot. Your partner's not encouraging you, and your partner sounds like doesn't want to do the work. So I'm going to address this, and I want to just make sure that there are two aspects to this question of your partner not wanting to move forward, not wanting to join you, not encouraging you. So there is two situations where that's true, and one of them is not that big of a deal, and one of them is a really big deal. So if you're with somebody that doesn't want to do the things that you want to do. They're not interested in having fun. For example, like let's say my husband really wanted to go to a dude ranch. I personally have zero interest in doing that. I do not want to move forward with that idea. I once went to a dude ranch to celebrate my dad's 70th birthday, and I got bucked off a horse and broke my leg and my tailbone. Not interested in that. However, it is important if you want to go the distance. I believe this so much that you are able to do things on your own and you are supported in that. So it's very different to say that your partner doesn't want to be the plus one in your professional dancing career, or they don't want to be the plus one in your desire to scale Mount Kilimanjaro. That's cool. You should pursue things separately from one another. You should have friends that you go off and do things with. You should have goals and hobbies that are yours alone. But I don't think that's what you're asking. I think what you're asking is what do I do if I want to work on this, but my husband will not go to therapy? My husband will not address the problems. My partner or wife will not do the work. If you're in that situation where you're willing and you love this person and they refuse to go to therapy, it's not going to work. You can go to therapy alone, but you will not be working on your marriage. You'll be working on yourself. And yes, therapy will change you for the better. And it might just change some of your habits and your mindset. So that changes the dynamic in your marriage. But to me, that's really a marriage of enduring. It's a marriage that you're surviving because you're with somebody that's not willing to meet you halfway. And when you're in a relationship and the other person won't work on it, what's going to happen is, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again, is the one person who's willing to go to therapy, who's willing to look in the mirror, who's willing to work on themselves, you know what they tend to do? They work themselves to a new level and right on out of that marriage. That's what happens. Because if you don't continue to grow with somebody, you're going to grow to resent them. And that is a scary place. But my only kind of recommendation is you got to keep asking, you got to work on yourself. And at some point, there will become a time where you're going to say, it's not negotiable. In order for me to stay in this relationship, you have to be able to do XYZ. And if you can't do those things, then I can't stay in this because you're not willing to work on it. And I hope it doesn't come to that. Now, another thing that has made a big difference in our relationship in the last couple years, bringing us much closer together, is reversing roles. So, this is not some sort of like thing you're going to do in the bedroom, although you can. This is not the thing that I'm referring to, although maybe Chris and I should try that. But what I'm talking about is sort of the default roles that you both play in your relationship. So I used to be the person, and this is probably due to my anxiety, where I was the one that was always planning everything. I would pick the restaurants, I'd set the agenda, I would bulldoze the path forward. Um, and here's what I learned in therapy: that in me moving so fast all the time and always taking control, it created two major problems. Problem number one: Chris had zero room to step in and take the lead and take care of me. And the more I just did it, I just took care of it, I just picked the restaurant, da, 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 the more I made Chris feel really concerned that if he tried to do those things, I wouldn't like what he did. And so my busyness, my proactiveness, my anxiety about it, my just get it done, get it done, get it done, get it done, it literally made his silence and his thinking worse because there was no room for him to do anything. And second, and here's where the real kicker came: I started to feel like everything was always up to me, and that if I didn't do it, nobody would do it. And, it's funny because this dynamic that I created because of my sort of anxious and go getter nature literally was the reason why this happened. I would do everything and then be like, why the hell are you doing something? Why is it always me doing something? And then Chris would go like, well, because you're always doing something and I never have time to do something. And I would like to do something, but you've already done that thing. And so we were just locked in this. We were physically together, but having a massive disconnection in our emotional experience of being together. And that theme showed up over and over and over again in therapy. In fact, when Dr. Cooper said to us, you guys are great at transaction, you're sequestered emotionally. That's exactly what he meant. That you're great at doing all this shit, Mel. And you're great at doing all your shit, Chris, but you're in your own corners emotionally and you're not aware of how one another is feeling. So, how are we changing that? Well, there's a lot of slowing down, I'm learning, when you are changing a relationship for the better. Because what you're really changing in your relationship when you change it for the better is you are breaking apart the old patterns and you are replacing them with new ways of showing up. And so, again, it's like habits that you need to break and replace and a muscle that you need to rep. And so, me personally, I'm working on stepping back instead of just racing ahead full throttle. And I am giving Chris the lead on planning and organizing. I mean, the man does design and lead men's retreats, for crying out loud. So, for example, when our anniversary came up, normally I would pick what we're going to do. I would do all this kind of stuff. And, I also noticed that I have this propensity to be like, oh, no, that's okay. You don't have to get anything. Oh, no, 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 I don't need anything. Let's not do presents this year. And then I'd be pissed off that there were no presents. So the poor guy couldn't win. I told you I was the asshole in this relationship. So I said to Chris, why don't you just take the reins? Don't even tell me what we're doing. And it was incredible. He surprised me and booked this place that was literally less than an hour away from us in southern Vermont. We took a few days off to just unplug and eat phenomenal food and sleep without the dog waking us up at 5:30 in the morning. And Chris surprised me. It was on our 26th wedding anniversary. On that first night with this stunning ring and vows that he had written out. And, the ring was really insane because Chris had not given me a piece of jewelry that he had picked out and bought for me since our engagement ring. I'm going to say that again. In 26 years, Chris had not picked out and given me a piece of jewelry since our engagement ring. I had always pointed things out and told him what to get and again managed that. And what had happened is a year ago, we were deep in therapy and I was out in Vegas to give a speech and Chris had come with me. And as a lark, one night before we were about to pull into the elevators at the hotel, We walked into this jewelry store and I tried on this crazy ring. And little did I know, Chris had called the store after we left Vegas, got the details, and had a jeweler back home make it. And he had been holding on to it for months, waiting for the right time to give it to me. Now, I, of course, had nothing to give to him, um, but it was incredible. And, after that experience, I nicknamed him the trip leader because I realized that the moments in life that I feel the safest and the most in love with him are not when he's giving me jewelry, it's when he's the leader. He's blazing the trail when we're hiking. He's setting up camp when we're camping. He is really doing what he does best, which ironically is planning. In fact, he's so good at it, I might never, ever plan a thing again. And one other thing I want to say about that when our 25th wedding anniversary hit, things were so bad between us, we didn't do anything. I mean, imagine making it to 25 years and being in a state in your marriage where you're like, I don't even feel like celebrating. We have so much work to do to find our way back to one another after all the shit that we have been through these past couple years and how far apart we feel from one another and how much resentment has built up. And for him, how much shame and regret. And for me, shame and regret too. That on our 25th wedding anniversary, we didn't do anything. We didn't celebrate. We didn't post about it. We didn't toast. We just let the day come and we let the day go. And so for us to get to a point a year later where he and I have been working hard to truly address the things that went sideways and to hear one another and to be interested in one another's experience and feelings and be interested in showing up and changing. That's what we were actually celebrating. That's why there were new vows. And that's what's possible when both of you are willing to do the work. And so the fifth thing is you got to ask for what you need. It's taken me 20 some years to just ask for what I need. This is a novel idea, but instead of being pissed off at your partner, why not just ask for what you need? It's a lot easier than being angry and annoyed all the time. And I think a lot of us get into trouble. This is that sort of slow, quiet quitting that I was talking about because we show up in a relationship and we expect our partner to behave the same way we wish they would. And we don't ever fully communicate what we actually need. And they don't ever fully communicate what they need. I gave you the example of us being married for 20 years and me not even knowing that Chris prefers to be intimate in the morning. Never talked about it. Like that's dumb. Why not just talk about it? It just is so obvious. I'll give you another example. I love flowers. I mean, I love, love, love flowers. I have parents that turned a wooded plot of land in suburban West Michigan into this gorgeous, gorgeous perennial garden. And I just love flowers. It reminds me of my childhood. I love taking care of them. I love growing them. And I love buying myself flowers. Nothing makes me happier than going to the grocery store. And if I see a little bouquet of tulips or daffodils, I mean, I'm talking $3, $4. You don't have to like buy the roses. I just love having fresh flowers in my house. And when Chris goes to the grocery store and he buys a bundle of tulips for me, it's like, oh my God, you were thinking about me and you know this about me. It took me a long time to tell Chris that. Do you know what was happening instead? For years, when I would travel, I would take off on a Monday to go give a bunch of speeches. I'd return home on a Friday, like a lot of you do that travel for work, that are road warriors out there. And I would come home, and you know what would be on the kitchen counter when I got home? A vase full of the dead flowers that I had bought for myself that nobody in the family had bothered to pull out of the vase while I was gone. And when I would walk in and see those dead flowers, that was a sign to me that nobody even thought about me while I was gone. Nobody was expecting me to come home tonight. Nobody was excited for me to come home. And so one day I said to Chris, You know, it would mean a lot to me if when I come home from a business trip, or hell, whenever you go to the grocery store, if you just picked up flowers. Because when I see, I'm talking grocery store flowers, people. I'm not talking go to the florist. I'm saying the bare minimum. When there's a little bundle of tulips sitting in a plastic vase on the counter or a mason jar, it makes me know that you're thinking of me. And I'll tell you, that's all it took. Every time the man goes to the grocery store, he returns with flowers, and it puts the biggest freaking smile on my face. So ask. Instead of punishing somebody, instead of quietly quitting, get loud about what you want. And in return, ask your partner to get loud about what they need from you. Don't assume that you know your partner's love language or what they wish that you were doing. Just ask them and start doing it. And finally, this is a big one. Assume good intent. One of the things that I've learned about my husband, Chris, it's been a reminder, really. And this is one of those things that happens when you really slow down and you get present with the person, whether it's your spouse or your partner or a friend, is that my husband's just like, he's just like a really nice guy. There's not a mean bone in Christopher Robin's body. And I get so worked up in my own shit that I forget that. I just forget that he's not out to be an asshole. He's not trying to screw me over. He's not some dickhead that's doing the. He's just a nice guy who's doing his best. And see, I think we forget that. If you deep down still love the person that you're with, but there's all this crap that's built up, find your way to anchor there. Assume good intent. Assume that they didn't mean to use that tone of voice, that they didn't mean to frustrate you, that they didn't mean to fail at whatever they failed at, that they didn't mean. Assume good intent. Remember the person that you fell in love with, because I believe that person is still deep down in there. But any relationship, whether it's a friendship or a family relationship or a love relationship that goes the distance, there's shit that builds up. But the person who they are at their core, that doesn't change. That doesn't change. And so if your response to me saying, assume good intent is, oh, Christ, Mel. I mean, you should, like, and you're starting to make a case about the person you're with, there's your answer. Get out. If you can't even admit that at their core, this is a good person, this is a nice person, then get out, because you're with somebody that's not a nice person. You're more committed to making your case and being right about this than you are about seeing something deeper that's worth working for. And to me, that's the bottom line, because that's what I've learned through these past challenging years and at times very painful changes in years that we've been through. That if you're both willing to look a little deeper and remind yourself of why you loved him in the first place, if you're both willing to look in the mirror and work on yourselves and your relationship, you can work through anything. You really can. You can get through some horrific things. You can get through things that seem insurmountable, whether it is addiction or the death of a loved one or cheating or bankruptcy. You can get through all kinds of things if you're both willing to work on yourselves and your relationship. If you're willing to remember that deep down, you're with somebody that is a good person at heart that maybe lost their way, that your relationship is a living, breathing, organic thing, a place where you're either going to grow or you're going to wither and die. You got to care for it. You got to tend to it. You got to shower it with kindness and genuine interest and support. And please, dear God, can we start having some fucking fun? I mean, let's just stop waiting for another couple to invite you over. and start throwing some dinner parties and some dance parties and some playlists and have some fun. Like maybe it's that we've all gotten a little too serious. Save the serious talk for your therapy sessions and bring the fun to the rest of your life. Bring your inner life to the surface. And I'm telling you, your connection will not only grow, but it will also grow strong. And in case no one else tells you today, I hope that your partner or your friend tells you this, but in case they don't, I'm going to tell you I love you and I believe in you and I believe in your ability to create a better life and better relationships. And how about you start putting what I just shared with you to work right now? In your work, you describe 4 attachment styles. And so the first one is secure. What does that
Secure.
mean?
Secure, you are comfortable giving and receiving love. You trust that other people love you. You can bring up conflict very level-headedly. Your skill is really perspective taking. When something happens in your relationships, you are thinking about the other person's needs and your own and how to balance both of your needs. You tend to be a really good friend. You're more likely to initiate friendships, less likely to end friendships, more likely to maintain them. Very comfortable being vulnerable, but in a flexible way. Whereas anxious people, you'll see them be vulnerable, vulnerable, vulnerable. Other people aren't responding and they're still pushing vulnerability, where secure people are like, if you're not responsive to this, I'm going to become less vulnerable. They tend to look for relationships with other people that are healthy, right? Because their assumption is that I'm lovable and I deserve to be loved by other people.
So, at the basis of somebody with a secure attachment style, you have an assumption that you are lovable and that you deserve to be loved.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of like you're on your own side, right?
is
Like
there
you're
anybody on the planet like that? I just, can you introduce me to them? I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Because it feels like that's a very whole and safe and healthy human being.
Yeah. And attachment is a spectrum, right? So nobody's fully secure, just like nobody's fully anxious or nobody's fully avoidant.
So the second one is anxious. So can you tell us what
Anxious.
what an anxious attachment style might be?
So your core fear is that everybody's abandoning you. You tend to see rejection even when it's not occurring. Like a friend is like tired and you're like, oh my God, they're rejecting me, they hate me, or a friend has taken a little longer to respond to you, right? You don't consider other people's circumstances when determining how they're treating you. You just take everything personally. At the neurological level, research finds that your amygdala, which is the part of your brain associated with stress, is more sensitive. It lights up more than people of other attachment styles. You are, kind of passive aggressive in conflict. You are very self-sacrificing until you sort of blow up because you can't take it anymore, right? Your relationships just tend to be kind of unbalanced. It's you giving, giving, giving until you can't anymore. And then you sort of just pull away. You're not very flexible. You can be kind of controlling again, because like I spoke about earlier, you need other people to soothe your emotions. So when someone is doing something and you feel triggered, you almost have to try to control them to get you to soothe your own emotions. So anxiously attached people, they're like kind of avoidant towards themselves. Like their internal dialogue is like, I'm too much, these feelings aren't okay, right? They very much invalidate their own feelings and emotions, which is part of the reason why they really need other people to validate themselves.
You basically just described me. I don't know if you knew that this was a therapy session for Mel Robbins, but Dr. Franco, we just have a diagnosis now. Let's talk about the third attachment style, avoidant.
Yeah. So avoidant people, they fundamentally don't trust others. They think if I get close to you, you are going to harm me. So they don't get close to others. They don't initiate as much. They're more likely to end friendships, more likely to ghost on others, not as emotional, very struggle so much with vulnerability, not only in themselves, but other people. Like if you're vulnerable with someone who's more avoidant, they might pull away from you, right? In relationships, it feels like there's a dance with them where you feel like you're getting close to them, and then all of a sudden they sort of back away. They tend to ignore problems. They minimize them. They ignore conflict. They talk like everything's always okay. And why are you making a big deal of them? Like they have this assumption that people shouldn't have needs, both them and other people. And so when it comes to friendship, they're sort of like low effort and low reward. They don't put a lot of effort into their relationships, and they also feel very disconnected from other people.
And then you said there was a fourth one. It's not quite organized, meaning that the style is the style when it comes to connection or like trying to connect, but that it's this fourth one that's a little bit more disorganized, you said. So can you explain a little bit
Yeah.
more about that one?
Yeah, so this disorganized, it's people that have really grown up in more extreme situations like abuse. And so they have to sort of pull out the whole toolbox of strategies to try to find safety. So it's sort of like they kind of flip between anxious and avoidant depending on how you're interacting with them. Once you get closer to them, they all of a sudden might become avoidant and feel a sudden need to very much withdraw. It's like they feel this duality, like I really want to connect with people, but I'm also so petrified of connection. And it puts them in a bit of a freeze state. Like there's this feeling that I'm kind of like paralyzed. I don't know what to do in this relationship. I don't know whether to come close or to pull away because I have both of these needs that feel so strong within me.
Why, Dr. Franco, do attachment styles matter?
Mm. Yes. So our attachment style really impacts how we give and receive love, and thus our ability to build healthy relationships with other people.
Wow. Does everybody have an attachment style?
Yeah, we all have an attachment style. It's basically like we all come into new relationships which with a set of assumptions, and those assumptions define our attachment style.
Okay. So, can you give me we know that the four attachment styles we've already talked about: secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized.
Disorganized, yeah.
Can you give me four signs of each attachment style?
Sure. Yeah. So let's think about this practically in our relationships. If you're with someone securely attached, you set a boundary with them, they accept the boundary. They don't try to push it, change it. They don't suddenly pull away because you set that boundary. If you're with someone securely attached, they're comfortable being vulnerable. You'll see that they're being vulnerable with you, but almost in a more reciprocal way. Like they'll be vulnerable, they'll wait for you to be vulnerable back, then they'll be more vulnerable. Whereas someone avoidantly attached really won't be able to be vulnerable. If someone is securely attached, they can address you directly, but not confrontationally. So let's say this is in a friendship context, right? Where, it feels like the friendship has been one-sided. The securely attached friend will say, I love you. I want to be close to you. And I've noticed I've been the one reaching out and that's been hurting me. And I want our friendship to continue. So I figured I'd bring this up. So those are some signs of securely attached people. Anxiously attached people, their core fear is that everyone will abandon them. So you can tell what someone's anxiously attached when they're almost like willing to give up their sense of self to be in relationship with other people. So they're like hyper accommodating often until it really blows up and then they become the opposite. When it comes they anxiously attached people because they fear abandonment, they're not necessarily good at setting boundaries. So they might agree to things and then it seems like they're resentful about it. We talked about, egoistic giving, that they're generous oftentimes to get people to like them. They're attracted to relationships with people that don't seem to like them very much because they've learned that they had to earn love. So you'll see an anxiously attached person having these friendships with people or these relationships with people that kind of mistreat them because that makes them motivated to earn love. And that's what they learned about love, that it's something that's earned, not freely given. Um, and then avoidantly attached people, you'll know they're avoidant because they're never vulnerable. You don't feel like you really know them. When you maybe do have a moment of intimacy and closeness, they suddenly pull away and you're like, what the heck is going on? They have a lot of shame, but they don't really admit to it. So they're really struggle with things like apologizing. Whereas anxiously attached person is going to over apologize. The avoidantly attached person is going to say, no, this is not my fault. This is kind of your fault. They just don't tend to put much effort into their relationship. So if you feel like, man, this person, I'm trying to connect with them, they're not really meeting me there. And that person might be more avoidantly attached. Like I can't get them to like try. They're not really trying. That might be a sign of avoidant attachment. That being said, of course, attachment is not stagnant. In different relationships, we can have different attachment styles. based off of the attachment style of the other person. So, it's hard to say based on your interactions with one person what their attachment style is.
What about somebody who's disorganized? What are some of the signs that you're kind of in a relationship or a friendship with somebody who has a disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, so the disorganized attachment style is it's not organized, right? So it feels like chaos. Sometimes they want you to get really close, sometimes they're pushing you away. Um Sudden withdrawal. They're they're they have trouble regulating their emotions because their relationships have not helped them do that in the past. People have not validated their feelings. So you might get more escalation, more anger. They might be interpreting your actions with a lot of negative intent, like you're going out of your way to harm me, to kind of destroy me. And and so it'll kind of feel chaotic. Like you kind of will be like, what is going on? Like I thought we were just connecting, and they have a kind of very different interpretation of the situation. And usually with a disorganized attachment style, there's a history of a pretty brutal background, like a
Mm.
history of some sort of abuse in childhood.
Is it easier to spot someone's attachment style in yourself or in somebody else?
You know, one way that I hear other people's attachment style is like how they perceive other people. So, the insecure attack with anxious people, you hear them say like all my relationships are fragile or everybody's going to kind of abandon me. And the avoidance, you'll hear them say nobody can be trusted, right? And when you have this one template about everybody, it's a sign that it's not actually everybody because you're not actually discerning each person. You just are coming in with this understanding and superimposing it onto the present, which is what attachment style is really. So when I hear someone secure though, they always try to give people the benefit of the doubt while having boundaries. So they'll say things like, I had to love that person from afar. And they can admit that even
Mm.
when even though we didn't maybe like when they talk about their exes, there'll be some complexity. Like it didn't work out for this reason, but I like them for this reason instead of like my ex was, just evil. So you'll hear that complexity with securely attached people, and you'll hear them trying to trying to be as loving as possible to people while also having them recognize what they need for themselves. So kind of both things. There's just more nuance with securely attached people. And avoidant I'm sorry, I'm answering your previous question, but I'm realizing so I have so many more thoughts on this. Whereas avoidantly attached people actually have memory issues because they block out their emotion. If you ask them to talk about things, they are not very expressive. Like it's hard to get them to describe things. It's hard to get them to describe what they think or what they feel because our emotions are big indicators of what we think and feel and our opinions in our internal world. So it'll almost feel like, with someone avoidantly attached, it's like, yeah, the conversation is maybe when it's specifically when you talk about relationships, the conversation doesn't go as deep. Whereas anxiously attached people, their memory, they tend to misremember things and remember things as more negative than they actually were. So
Mm.
that's really interesting quirk, attachment theory and memory. But back to your major question, which was, is it easier to recognize in yourself and someone else? Honestly, I think anxiously attached people tend to be so hungry for information as to how to improve. So when I talk, anxiously attached people are ready, they follow up with me and they're like, that's me. Like, I'm anxiously attached. I cling. I'm so afraid everyone's going to abandon me. I think everybody's judging me. So I think often anxiously attached people, they hear, the basics of attachment theory and they kind of, quickly see themselves in it. That's not happened to me as much with avoidantly attached people. Again, they struggle with vulnerability. So I imagine it would be harder to say I'm avoidantly attached and I've had these struggles in the past.
So
Avoidant,
if I have a
yeah,
question about that because that's
sure.
fascinating. If you are avoidantly attached and you're listening to somebody talk about attachment theory, given that somebody that has an anxious attachment style might immediately self-diagnose, might immediately see themselves, an avoidant attachment style person likely to experience as they're learning about attachment styles and
Mm.
considering themselves as they're listening to you, Dr. Franco?
Yeah, discomfort. When you get deep with avoidantly attached people, or you try to get them to acknowledge some of their wounds, they feel very uncomfortable with that, and will kind of, maybe they'll stop listening. Honestly, I mean, this obviously depends, and honestly, there's some research that finds that if you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant but has humility, there's a lot better outcomes. Whereas if the avoidant person is like, everything's your fault and I'm fine and you're being sensitive and right, then it's going to be really hard to connect with that specific form of avoidant attachment. But so there has to be, with an avoidant attachment, a willingness to to look at yourself and to be conscious of your patterns, which I think anxiously attached people tend to be more willing to do. If you're having conflict with an avoidant person, often they are just stonewalling, or they're
Mm,
ghosting, or they're minimizing, or they're saying like, we're not going to talk about this. Like, basically anything related to relationships and intimacy really scares and overwhelms avoidantly attached people. Like, sometimes we think of anxiously attached people as more sensitive, in that they get really overwhelmed when a relationship's not going well. But so do avoidantly attached people. They just express it. They express that sensitivity through removal. Like, they can't they can't they're so overwhelmed emotionally by relationships, by intimacy. And so they're stonewalling, which is a sign of being emotionally overwhelmed. They're being closed off, they're being dismissive, because it's too emotionally overwhelming to look at some of their own patterns, because fundamentally avoidantly attached people have a lot of shame. If you tell them they've made a mistake, they have this core belief that I am a failure, that I am deficient. They probably won't admit that to you. Right. But anytime you try to offer a critique to an avoidantly attached person, that you might trigger that core wound of, I'm a failure, I'm deficient, which is why it can feel so hard for an avoidantly attached person to hear some of their patterns and hear some of their dynamics.
let's talk about the amends letter and the 5 steps to reconciliation. And again, whether it's an adult child or it's a sibling or it is a friend or your parent is the one that pieced out and you don't know why. I can't
Yeah, which
tell
does
you,
happen.
I have sat in the last month next to people on planes who have disclosed to me. One man in particular said, I'm a fan of your podcast. Could you please do something about estrangement?
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
in his case, it was a daughter with mental health issues who they have
Common,
not talked to in 7 years.
common.
But that's something that I keep thinking about, which is I know a lot of people that are dealing with this.
Yep.
And so I wanted to do an episode because this is way more common than I think the studies even indicate.
I totally agree with you.
And there is a tremendous amount of content, I agree with you, coaching people to cut people out, to have boundaries, which are important.
Sure.
We may differ a little bit in terms of the influence of childhood trauma on adult behavior. I think our difference probably has more to do with how much people lean on it versus taking responsibility for healing it.
Sure.
But when you get to that point where you feel like, I don't have the ability to have this person in my life, it's easier to just stop having a relationship with them. What are the 5 steps for somebody who's on the receiving end of that? Because we don't talk about that a lot. We don't talk a lot about, look, your parents did the best they could. If you look at the way your parents were treated growing up, it explains a lot about what they did.
Yeah.
Doesn't justify it, Dr. Coleman,
No, I agree.
but it certainly explains it. So
Right.
what are the 5 steps to reconciliation?
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends on who the person is who's seeking the help. I increasingly am having more adult children contact me who the parents cut them off, or they're
Really?
the ones who want help. Yeah. Or even if the parents haven't cut them off, they just want an improved relationship. And I'm happy that my book speaks to the adult child as well, because it was written for the parent. It typically requires leader. I mean, if the adult child contacts me, then I'll reach out to the parent. But I'll also explain to them my method in the same way that if they were the ones who had reached out to me, and I'll say that this is the way that I work. So you need to know that before you sign on to doing any sessions with me. If you imagine that my goal is going to just be to side with you about how terrible your kid is, it's not going to happen. So I'm very clear about that as a kind of a framework. Siblings are more complicated because for parents, it's very easy for me to get a parent to take the high road, to take responsibility, because they're in so much pain. And there's this kind of a role violation of, if a child cuts off a parent, there's a feeling like, well, it is my obligation to heal this. And, I clearly, even if they feel like they're innocent, they can feel a great, enormous sense of shame that their child feels like they've failed them. So it's not, there are parents who won't do what I tell them to do. I can't help them if they will. I tell parents, this isn't about, right or wrong per se. It's kind of about the practicality. I mean, I do think that there is a moral basis to what I preach. The parents should take the high road, that their children didn't choose to have them, and therefore it is incumbent on parents to take the high road and take responsibility and not get pulled into the weeds, not return fire with fire. But there's not like a third option. Like parents sometimes want, me to help them see how unfair their kid is being or that kind of thing. That just doesn't work. But anyway, with siblings, it's more tricky because parents are willing to walk over hot coals, which is sometimes required. But siblings typically aren't. So somebody has to take the high road. Somebody has to be willing to not get pulled into the weeds, to make amends, to probably take more responsibility than they think is fair. I mean, if both siblings are equally motivated to heal the relationship, and I have worked with those kind of siblings, that's easier. Then it's more like marriage therapy. Then you can examine the dynamics that shape them both and get them learn how to communicate more and kind of make the unconscious processes much more conscious. But more typically, one sibling is completely estranged and the other sibling is in pain about the estrangement. So typically the person who's in the most pain has to show more leadership. So that's the tricky part.
I love what you said before we jump into the 5 steps. I just want to take a highlighter and make sure that everybody heard something that you said. You said that your personal belief is that the parents have a moral obligation to take the higher road because they chose to bring their children into the world.
Correct.
And I think that's an interesting thing to think about because you're right, there has been this rise of individualism. And I'm responsible for my happiness. And I don't even know where I was going with it, but I just felt like that's a very profound thing. And I think a lot of times when you get really wrapped up in feeling like things should be fair or your kids owe you something, we forget as parents that we're the ones that brought them into the world.
Right.
They didn't choose us. We chose and created them.
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean they owe us anything. If anything, it means we owe them something.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I would say 2 things to that. One is that I extend that even to wills. Like a lot of the parents in my practice, have been treated miserably by their adult children. And it wouldn't surprise me. I'm sympathetic to some of these parents who want to cut their kids out of their will. But I say I don't support parents doing that.
Why?
Because
it seems like my natural reflection is, of course, if you're going to cut me out of your life, why the fuck would I give you any money? Because I've been paying for your ass your whole adult life. Like, why would I continue to do that if you don't even... do you see how quickly I could go into that I'm an angry, resentful parent?
Sure. Yeah. No.
But why would you say that? Why should somebody who's had a kid cut them out actually give them money?
Yeah, no, I totally understand, and I'm sympathetic to any parent. The reason is that we're parents forever, and we're parenting long after we're gone. I mean, my parents, are both dead, and they still continue. Their influence still persists with me. Some good ways and some bad ways. But I don't think our responsibility as parents ends when we die. And as much as I hate the way some of these adult children treat their parents, how contemptuous, how self-righteous, how rejecting they are, how much they've immiserated the life of the parent, I still think that the role of parent continues after the parent dies. And it's also an issue, a question of what do you want your legacy to be? Do you want your legacy to be that you punished your child from the grave? And that doesn't mean parents have to give their child every single penny, but that they might give them what they would give them if they were still alive. A, and B, if there's other siblings, it greatly complicates a sibling relationship if one of the children is cut out of the will. Yes, I do think there's a moral obligation to parents. I think there also is a moral obligation to it from adult children that we've lost sight of in this culture. I actually do think that adult children owe the parents something. I don't think that parents can demand that or extract it or guilt trip the child into doing it. But I think as a culture, some of these children who are estranging their parents have been given a quality of life that, their parents would have dreamed of. So the idea that the children just gets to say, well, you didn't go to, I mean, some of the reasons that adult children cut off contact aren't because the parent was abusive or neglectful. It's because, their therapist has convinced them that the parent was more responsible for how their lives turned out than they were. Or the kid got married to somebody who hates the parent, and the kid isn't strong enough to stand up to their spouse and say, no, they're my parents. I want them to see them, and I want them to see their grandchildren regardless. So I think that in the same way that parents have a moral obligation, I think adult children do too. Now, that doesn't mean that they're obligated to stay in contact no matter how abusive or hurtful or critical or shaming, or rejecting the parent is. But they are morally obligated to give the parent a time of due diligence, to repair, to do therapy, to hear them out, to think of the parent in a more three-dimensional way, to view it from the perspective that you were saying earlier, that they did the best they could, not in a way that they just get to be forgiven no matter how crappy their parenting was, but that a perspective of compassion rather than contempt. So I think both sides, there's moral obligations.
That's beautiful. It's
Oh,
really beautiful because, I know in my own life, and I mentioned about my uncle never meeting his two grandkids, it was heartbreaking
yeah,
that they were at the memorial service.
yeah.
And I think you
They were,
probably see that a lot, that people
mhm,
show up in death
yeah,
because there is something deeper that connects us all. And I think that
right.
that's what that speaks to. And we have
Exactly.
this inability as emotional beings to navigate what feels like endless landmines that
Hmm.
can develop between us. And so, what are the 5 steps that people can take in any situation, in any relationship where there has been an estrangement and you're the one, whether it's you want to take the higher ground or you're the one that's hurting more? What are the steps, doctor?
Yeah. Well, what I often tell parents is there's a lot more things you can do wrong than you can do right. So, the things you can do wrong are contained in the 5 most common mistakes that we've already discussed. The things that you can do right are to show compassion, to take responsibility, to find the kernel, if not the bushel, of truth in a child's complaints, to communicate that that they wouldn't have cut off contact unless they felt like it was the healthiest thing for them to do. If you have no idea what the reasons are, and some parents don't, to say that it's clear I have significant blind spots as a parent or as a person, that I don't have a deeper understanding, but I want to. Would you feel comfortable writing me and telling me more about what your thoughts or feelings are that make you feel like this is the healthiest thing for you to do? I promise to listen or read purely from the perspective of learning and not in any way to defend myself. To on the one hand, to not give up, but at some point you might have to stop as a show of respect. So, for example, if you're getting your letters returned unopened, returned to sender, have threats of the police called on you, communicating through an attorney, or your kid just gets so unraveled, then you should just stop completely for a year. Sometimes stopping completely works because the adult child can feel like the parent is respecting their boundaries finally. It can make them respect the parent more, that they're not just continuing to try no matter what. That old saying, how can I miss you if you don't go away, is sometimes true in family life. It can create, that sort of space for the adult child to come into. So there's a lot of reasons why sometimes just stopping completely is the right thing. But a lot of it, and this is particularly true of parents who have been victims of parental alienation, where they've been brainwashed against the parent by the other parent after a divorce, is to embody what I call kind of the lighthouse model, that you're just there on the beach, you're steady, you're like broadcasting light from this definite point on the beach while your child is being pushed up and down out at sea by the waves. And sometimes they'll come out and see you standing on the beach there broadcasting light and they'll get oriented towards you, but then they'll be carried back out to sea and pushed underwater again. But your task as a parent is to be steady and loving and compassionate and available and responsibility taking, and hope that over time your child can find their way back to you through those efforts.
Can you define or can you describe what an amends letter is and how you write one?
Sure. First of all, they're much shorter than parents often think they should be. Typically, 2 paragraphs is as much as I recommend. You don't want it
Wow.
to be so long that, sort of so much rope that you're going to hang yourself with it. They should be courageous. In AA, they talk about making a fearless and searching moral inventory of your character flaws. I think the same is true of an amends letter to if your child has made complaints about you, to be able to really fearlessly say what those were and how you can see how that could have impacted your child, how that might have been hurtful or traumatizing to them or damaging to them or affected their feelings of trust or safety or security in you or the relationship with you. That's critically important to not blame anybody else, to not make excuses, to not say, well, I was a single mother, well, your dad didn't pay any child support, or well, your mother blame me for divorce when it wasn't my fault, or you had ADD or learning disabilities, or you had your own issues, or no, no, and no. It's 100% about empathy, responsibility taking. That there has to be blood on the tracks, meaning that the parent has to actually do show courage in facing their own character flaws, not in a self-hating way, but just in a way, and that's critically important as well. It shouldn't be an exercise in masochism, even though it is a painful thing to do. I understand from my own personal experience. They're not fun letters to write. They're actually super hard
What was it
letters.
like for you to write one to your daughter when she cut you off?
Well, I mean, there's two things that go into it. One is this going to work? And the other is just having to face the reality of some of her complaints. I mean, I can empathize with the ways that she felt sort of sidelined when I remarried and had their children, and how my children from my current marriage had a much better quality of life and were raised in the context of a stable marriage, and she didn't have that, and she was, kind of went back and forth between two homes, and there was conflict with me and her mother, and there's a lot there to be hurt and upset and feel displaced about. So it was very painful. It was, there've been numerous times where we've cried together about it because it was, yeah, it's just really painful.
What was her response to your letter?
Good. I mean, she, to her credit, what I tell parents is I was just lucky that my daughter had whatever it is that causes an adult child to forgive and to accept. Not all parents, there are parents who are just as dedicated or empathic as me or communicate just as well or better than I did, who's the adult child wasn't or isn't willing or able to do that. But I was lucky that she was able to. Now, it didn't happen right away, and it often doesn't. That's why I say it's often a marathon, not a sprint. So took a while, and actually we had a number of conversations. It wasn't just like one simple thing like, oh, great, clouds have parted, all is forgiven. No, it still comes up periodically. I mean, not a
Mm.
lot, but those kind of things are fault lines in a parent-adult-child relationship that probably exist in some form. Will always be there in one form or another.
What if you're the one that's in the middle? So I've been in a situation where my two closest friends, one cut the other one off
Hmm.
and didn't talk to her for 3 years.
Yep.
And I was in a relationship with both of them. And one kept trying to reconcile and absolute stonewall from the other.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're the sibling or the other child or you're kind of the friend in the middle?
Yeah, well, it's often that a sibling will be, one child is estranged and the other sibling is not estranged from the parents. And what I tell parents is you can't really have your non-estranged child advocate for you. First of all, if one of your children is estranged from you, they're showing that they're capable of using estrangement, so they may well estrange that sibling.
Mm.
Second of all, the sibling may say that if you're acting like our parents' advocate, I will cut you off, or if you tell them anything that I'm telling you. So often the strange sibling makes the not estranged sibling swear, that they won't reveal what their reasons are, what they're thinking or feeling, sometimes even where they live. So I tell parents that they have to accept that boundary and limit, as difficult as it is. The other thing I tell parents is that, if you have one kid who's estranged, you don't want the non-estranged kids to feel like they have to sort of hold up some mirror of you as the great parent. They know how much pain you're in. So you're better off saying to them something like, look, your sister or your brother's estranged. Either we don't understand it or we do understand it, but I don't want you to feel like you have to sort of, repair my self-esteem by making me feel like I'm a great parent or whatever. You may have the same complaints about me or you may have different complaints, but I want you to feel like that there's room to do that without worrying about being overly burdensome to me. Now, if you're the friend, it's sort of a similar dynamic where you don't really have that kind of power to really change very, very much about it. And you don't really won't serve your friendship to be overly allied one against the other, even if you think that, one person's more at fault or more troubled or more difficult. And we've all got, probably most of us have at least one difficult friend, right? So we can be sympathetic to the other friend who's on the receiving end of that. But if you put yourself in a position of advocacy, it's not typically wanted. And so that can cause the person who's being advocated against to feel more misunderstood or ganged up on or that kind of thing.
I think if there's one thing I'm taking away from this incredible conversation is that when this happens, there's typically on the part of the person that is estranged this story or feeling that you just don't get it.
Yeah.
And
right.
I'm tired of trying to explain it, and I'm tired of you defending yourself, and it's just easier and better for me to remove this from my life right now.
Yeah.
And that's why everything that you're counseling us, which is the opposite of how you're going to feel when you
Right.
feel wronged or hurt or desperate to reconnect with somebody, that really you have to step into the shoes of the other person, or at least give them the experience that you have, as much as it may seem unfair, or it may seem like it's one-sided, or it may seem just, I don't know, like I'm sitting here, I can't even put myself in the shoes of somebody who's experiencing this, even though there's estrangement on both sides of my family, in extended family. And even though my two best friends didn't talk for 3 years, and even though, like, I see examples of this everywhere, and it must be a profoundly painful and challenging and humbling thing to do, to say, this is so important to me that I'm going to be the leader in this process. And the only way that we're going to make progress is if the person that's cut me out actually feels like they've been validated and understood without me defending myself.
Yeah. No, I think that's really well said. I think it's a really good summary of what this looks like and feels like. And one of the challenges is that generations are often talking past each other. So important article by Nick Haslam, who's an Australian psychologist, and he called it concept creep. And what he found was that over the past 3 decades, well, his article came out in 2015, so it's more than that at this point, but there's been an expansion of what we consider to be hurtful, traumatic, abusive, neglectful behavior. So often the adult child saying is, you neglected me, you were emotionally abusive, you traumatized me, and the parents are like, what? Because they're looking at it from the way those terms were defined when they were growing up, whereas the adult child is looking at it in a very different way. So often, if the adult child's saying, you emotionally abused me, the parents, particularly a lot of these parents who've given their children a really good quality of life, just can't relate to it. And so what I tell parents to say is, I wasn't aware that it's clear that I have blind spots that I wasn't aware that felt emotionally abusive to you. I'm glad you let me know. I would like to learn more about what that felt like to you, how that's impacted you. Is there something you'd like me to read? Would you like to get into therapy around it? Are there things you'd like me to work on in my own therapy? So again, it's kind of to the point that you were making. The parent has to really go toward the adult child's complaints rather than away from them. They do have to show a certain amount of courage and willingness to kind of get into the really painful territory of how the child feels like they neglected them or hurt them or let them down. And no parent really particularly wants to go there.
Definitely
It's
not.
not a fun place to be.
So when you get to the point where it's like, okay, I have gotten the message, you don't want to talk, I'm going to just go silent for a year. Do you send somebody flowers on their birthday? Do you
I
send,
don't.
like, how do you engage with somebody who doesn't want to engage with you?
Yeah, well, there's a difference between a kid who's a minor, which I would say that parents shouldn't give up, whereas versus a kid who's more full-fledged adult. So no, I think if somebody's going to let the line go cold per my recommendations, I recommend they don't do anything, because I think that for some adult children, they really need to feel that parent's absence. For some estrangements, they're really trying to get in touch with a certain part of themselves that they don't feel like they can access with the parent involved in their life. The parent in some ways is too important in their mind. The parent feels really unimportant, but it's in part because the adult child is sort of closed off contact in every avenue of access to that parent. So it's that feeling that the parent feels cut off because they haven't cut off. But the adult child is doing it because they feel like the parent's too important in their mind. So if the parent can do that, can be no contact in the same way that the adult child is requesting, then it allows the adult child to feel themselves in a different way in relationships with the parent. So it's what I call lose your parent, find yourself.
Wow. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.